Have you ever wondered if a strange, confusing, or seemingly meaningless dream could be more than just fleeting images in your mind? Have you ever woken up from a dream with your heart racing, feeling that something deeper was happening in the unseen? If you felt something like this, let me tell you that what you're about to hear is not an ordinary story. You didn't arrive here by accident. What happened with our protagonist carries a powerful and direct message for your life. And after hearing his story, you might start seeing your dreams with new eyes. So I ask you to pay close attention, because the signs you will discover in this story may be the key you need to understand how God is speaking to you, even through what seems meaningless. In a small village at the foot of the mountains of Judah lived a young man named Lemuel. Lemuel was not a prophet, nor the son of a priest. He wasn't known for his wisdom or great deeds. He was a humble farmer, like many in his village, and spent his days tending to his family's land and animals. However, there was something peculiar about him that no one else seemed to notice. Since his youth, Lemuel was a dreamer, not in the sense of having great aspirations or ambitions, but literally. Every night, without fail, he dreamt, and his dreams were often confusing and strange. There was no sense in them, or at least that's what he thought. One night, Lemuel had a dream unlike the others. In it, he walked through an endless desert, the sun's heat burning his skin, and in the distance, he saw a river that seemed out of place amid the sand. When he finally reached the river, instead of water, what flowed through the channel was liquid gold, bright and blinding. Lemuel tried to approach, but just as he was about to touch the river, it vanished, leaving him alone in the vast expanse of sand. He awoke startled, covered in sweat. What could that dream mean? Why was he dreaming of gold in the desert? He decided to ignore it, thinking it was just another strange, meaningless image his mind had created. But the dreams continued. Not always the same, but something peculiar, something incomprehensible every night. Lemuel began to feel that there was more behind these dreams, but he didn't know whom to turn to. There were no prophets in his village, and the elders always told him that dreams were just reflections of the day's thoughts and concerns. However, Lemuel couldn't shake the feeling that there was more. One night, when the desert dream repeated itself, he decided to seek answers. He remembered that in a neighboring village lived a wise old man named Aitan, known for his deep relationship with God. Without hesitation at dawn, Lemuel set out to find him. When he arrived, he shared with Aitan all his dreams, especially the one about the river of gold in the desert. The old man listened in silence, eyes closed, as if praying while Lemuel spoke. When the young man finished, Aitan opened his eyes and said, "Lemuel, what you see is not just a simple dream. It's a vision. God is speaking to you, but you're seeing things through the lens of confusion. The desert you see is your own life, a life that seems devoid of meaning at this moment. But the river of gold that appears is a promise. God is showing you that, although you don't see it now, there are spiritual riches waiting to be discovered, blessings coming from above. But as in your dream, those blessings won't come if you only observe them from afar. You have to approach, take a step of faith, even when it seems everything disappears before you." Lemuel was perplexed. Could it be that God was speaking to him through these dreams? He began to pray more fervently, asking for guidance and understanding. And slowly, what seemed meaningless began to make sense. The dreams weren't literal messages, but symbols pointing to something greater. One night, the dream changed. Instead of the desert, he saw a great harvest, a field full of golden wheat growing under a clear blue sky. In the center of the field, he saw a crystal clear spring he hadn't seen before. When he woke up, he understood it was time to act. Lemuel decided to take the small, barren land his family owned, which had yielded little fruit, and sow again, this time with faith that God would bless him. Months passed, and what seemed like a desperate attempt to cultivate infertile land turned into a miracle. The barren land flourished, and the harvest was abundant, much more than Lemuel or his family expected. The river of gold in his dream, in the end, wasn't material wealth, but God's blessing in his life in ways he had never imagined. My friend, perhaps like Lemuel, God has been speaking to you through dreams that seem nonsensical. You may have had visions, impressions, or moments of deep reflection where you don't understand what God is trying to say to you, but I encourage you not to ignore those signs. Often, God uses the unexpected, the mysterious, to reveal his will to us. What initially seems confusing may actually be an invitation to trust more deeply in him, to seek his guidance, and to open your heart to what he has prepared for you. Pay attention to your dreams, to those moments of deep introspection, because God may be speaking to your life in ways you don't yet comprehend. What seems meaningless may be loaded with divine significance, waiting for you to discover it. This story is not just a tale from ancient times. It's a reminder that God continues to speak, even today, in ways that often elude us. And the most beautiful thing is that when we finally begin to see with the eyes of faith, what once seemed a mystery becomes a clear and purposeful answer. If you've made it this far, I want to tell you it's not a coincidence. Although you might not believe it at this moment, the story you've just heard carries a message that can profoundly transform your life. It wasn't by chance that you've reached this point, and in the next few minutes, I'll show you something that may seem astonishing, like Lemuel's story. That young man who didn't understand his dreams reflects in many ways what you might be experiencing today. If you keep listening, you'll realize that the signs God used to speak to him are also present in your life, waiting for you to recognize them. If you're here, I want you to know that this message has been designed to touch the deepest part of your heart. Don't stop now, because what you're about to hear could be the answer to those questions you've been carrying inside for a long time. Now, let's think for a moment about Lemuel. Like him, many of us sometimes feel lost, without direction, not understanding what God is trying to tell us through the circumstances we live in. Perhaps, like Lemuel, we've experienced moments where we feel God is speaking to us, but what we see or dream doesn't make sense. You may have found yourself in the midst of a spiritual drought, wondering if God is still present, if his purpose for your life is still valid. Lemuel's story shows us that even when everything seems confusing, God is still working. Lemuel dreamt of a desert and a river of gold, but didn't understand what it meant. How many times have we had moments where we don't understand what God is doing in our lives? Sometimes we go through spiritual deserts, seasons where we feel exhausted, without answers, without direction. You might feel like you're in a desert right now. Perhaps you've reached a point in your life where you question if there really is something more, if God still has a plan for you. And here is where I want to remind you of something important. Deserts are not the end. They are the place where God forges his work in us. God showed Lemuel a river of gold in the midst of the desert, but that gold wasn't simply material. It represented the spiritual blessings that were to come, the riches God has prepared for those who trust in him, even when circumstances don't seem favorable. And you know what? That same river of blessings is available for you, no matter how old you are or how many times you've felt you've lost your way. If God could make Lemuel's desert bloom, he can also make yours flourish. You might think you've spent too much time waiting, that your life can no longer change significantly. But remember, Lemuel wasn't a prophet or someone of great importance. He was just a young farmer. God doesn't require you to be someone extraordinary in the world's eyes to speak to you or use you. He sees you just as you are, and it is in your weakness, in your confusion, where his power is perfected. Lemuel had to take a step of faith. Instead of continuing to see his land as barren and without a future, he decided to act. Sometimes we, too, must take that step. You might feel everything is dry right now, that there's no fruit. Perhaps you've been praying for an answer, a miracle for years and haven't seen it yet. But I encourage you, like Lemuel, not to lose faith. God hasn't forgotten you, and what seems like a desert today can become fertile ground tomorrow if you trust Him and follow His guidance. God revealed to Lemuel that the signs had been there all along, that his life was filled with purpose, even if he didn't see it. The same is true for you. Every step you've taken, every difficult moment, every prayer you've made in secret, it's all been part of a bigger plan. And even though you can't always see the full picture, God does. He has already charted your path and has blessings prepared for you. It's easy to feel that the dreams and visions God gives us are confusing or meaningless, but Lemuel's story reminds us that God does not leave us alone. He is constantly sending us signs, speaking to us, even amidst what seems like chaos. If you feel lost, I encourage you to pause and look for the signs. God is near, closer than you think, and He is speaking to your life, waiting for you to respond with faith. You might wonder how you can apply this to your life. My advice is simple: pray, trust, and act. Like Lemuel, you must be willing to take that step of faith. Don't wait to have all the answers or understand everything perfectly. God works through small acts of faith, through trust in what we do not see, and when we do, He takes care of the rest. What seemed like a meaningless dream can turn into a divine revelation that transforms your life. So, at this moment, I invite you to reflect deeply. What dreams, what signs has God given you? Where are you seeing confusion in your life that could be an invitation to trust Him more? Remember, God has not forgotten you, and His plan for you is still in motion, even if you don't fully understand it now. If you've come this far, it's because God is speaking to your heart. He is calling you to a deeper relationship, to trust that His hand is still guiding your life. Just as Lemuel, you may find yourself at a stage in life where you feel that many things no longer make sense, or that God's promises seem to have been forgotten. Perhaps you think you've gone through too many seasons of drought without seeing the fruit you expected, and you wonder if there's anything left to do. But here is where I want to remind you of something powerful. God doesn't work under the constraints of time as we do. No matter how many years have passed, how many times you've tried and failed, or how many seemingly confusing dreams you've had, for God, nothing is impossible, and it's never too late for His plan to be fulfilled in your life. Lemuel's story teaches us that God's signs can come at the most unexpected times and through the most unusual means, like dreams. What seemed meaningless to Lemuel was actually a divine promise. Similarly, it is possible that the moments of confusion you've experienced are filled with meaning even if you don't understand them now. Have you ever had a dream, a vision, or even an internal feeling that God was guiding you towards something, but you couldn't see how it would unfold? Perhaps that dream has repeated itself in your heart, not in night images, but as a desire, a promise you know God gave you long ago. Maybe you felt the call to serve in a specific way, to help others, or to see a transformation in your life or family. But the years have passed, and that dream remains unrealized. Let me tell you, as Lemuel learned, God's dreams do not fade, nor are they forgotten. They are sown in perfect time, waiting for the right moment to germinate. The river of gold in Lemuel's desert dream was symbolic of the blessing God had prepared for him. Perhaps in your life, that river of gold represents the promises God has planted in your heart. Those promises are not necessarily material, although it could also be that God has physical blessings for you. But often the river of gold represents spiritual abundance, the peace you've been seeking, the strength to face each new day, the emotional and physical healing that can only come from God. Remember how Lemuel at first didn't understand what God was showing him. He thought the dreams were meaningless, but when he decided to seek God's wisdom through the old man Itan, he began to see that God had already been speaking to him all along. The same may be true in your life. Perhaps God has already been speaking to you, already been guiding you, but you've been so focused on the day-to-day problems that you haven't been able to see the signs. Sometimes we are so busy trying to solve everything on our own that we forget that God has already planned for us. He is not surprised by our struggles, our doubts, or our falls. In fact, He is patiently waiting for us to turn our eyes to Him, to guide us. In Lemuel's story, the old man Achan helped interpret the dreams, but today we have something even greater, the Holy Spirit, who dwells in us and guides us. He is our counselor, our helper, and is willing to reveal the truths we need to continue on God's path. Perhaps, like Lemuel, the next step you need to take is to seek God's wisdom and direction with more intentionality. No matter how much time has passed, no matter how many deserts you've crossed, God has something prepared for you. You may need a new perspective, a different way of seeing the things that are already happening in your life. Like Lemuel, who decided to work on his family's seemingly barren land. Perhaps what God is waiting for from you is to begin acting in faith, even if you don't yet see the result. Sometimes the smallest step of faith can unlock the greatest blessings. Think of the fertile field that appeared in Lemuel's final dream. That field was waiting to be cultivated. Similarly, in your life, there are fields waiting for you to work on them. It could be an area of your life that you've been neglecting, or perhaps a calling you know God has placed in your heart, but haven't followed through with total commitment. You might feel it's too late, that you've missed too many opportunities, but let me tell you, it's never too late for God. He can restore what was lost. He can make what seemed dead flourish. And here's where I want to encourage you, trust in God's timing. If you feel you've been in a desert like Lemuel, trust that a river of blessings is waiting ahead. If you feel your dreams don't make sense, remember that God always has a purpose behind what He shows us, even if we don't understand it at first. The same God who spoke through Lemuel's dreams is the God who has given you promises and dreams. Don't ignore them. Don't underestimate them. Even though you don't see how it all fits together now, God is working. He is the God who transforms deserts into fertile fields, who turns confusing dreams into clear and abundant blessings. I want to invite you to pause in your daily life. Take a moment to pray, to reflect on the promises God has made in your life. Ask yourself, what areas of my life do I need to surrender completely to God? Where have I stopped dreaming, stopped expecting great things from Him? Like Lemuel, it is possible that God is already working, but you need to open the eyes of faith to see it. In the midst of your desert, keep walking. In the midst of the confusion, keep trusting. God has a plan for you that is not finished, and what He has begun in your life, He will carry out to its full completion. If you felt in your heart that God is calling you to take a step of faith, don't ignore it. He is with you, guiding you, and what seems like a meaningless dream may actually be the beginning of something much greater. What we have been exploring up to this point is deeper than you might imagine. It's not just an ancient story that seems remote, but it has a direct relationship with what you are living now. If something has resonated in your heart throughout this reflection, it's because God is using this story to speak to you, right in this moment of your life. Like Lemuel, you may find yourself facing challenges, situations you don't fully understand, or promises that seem to have stalled. Perhaps there are dreams in your heart that have been sown by God, but are yet to be fulfilled, and that generates uncertainty for you. However, I want to tell you with all my heart, you are not alone. God is working even in those dreams that now seem to be on pause. Just like Lemuel, you may be going through a desert, but I want you to remember something important. The desert is not your final destination. It's just a station on your journey toward the fulfillment of God's promises. You may, like Lemuel, be dreaming of rivers of gold, blessings that seem unattainable. You might wonder how those blessings can come when everything around you seems barren. But don't forget that God is a God of the impossible. What seems arid and lifeless to our eyes is fertile ground for God's perfect work. One of the great lessons that Lemuel's story leaves us is the importance of not giving up when we don't understand what God is doing. How many times do we find ourselves like him, dreaming without being able to decipher the message? How many times have we prayed and asked for answers only to feel that heaven is silent? But as we saw with Lemuel, God does not leave us without answers. He, in his time and in ways we often don't expect, shows us what we need to know. It is possible that in your walk you have felt discouraged because things have not turned out as you hoped. Perhaps you have been waiting for years to see an answer to your prayers, and now you wonder if it is worth continuing to wait. You might feel tired, and the spiritual desert you are going through seems endless. But I want to tell you something. God is with you in that desert, as he was with Lemuel. Don't let fatigue or frustration rob you of the blessing that is to come. God is faithful and does not leave his children in the desert without purpose. He has a perfect plan, even when we cannot see it. Think of Lemuel's patience, his willingness to listen, even though he didn't fully understand what was happening. You may also need that patience today, that faith that trusts in God despite the lack of clarity. Sometimes God calls us to walk by faith and not by sight. Sometimes he asks us to trust his plan, even if we don't fully understand it. And when we do, when we decide to trust amid uncertainty, God shows us his faithfulness in surprising ways. The old man Iton told Lemuel that the dreams were an invitation from God, not only for him, but also to bless others. The same is true for you. The promises and dreams that God has placed in your life are not just for your personal benefit. God is calling you to be a channel of blessing for those around you. Sometimes our dreams don't make sense to us because we are seeing only a part of the plan, but God sees the complete picture, and he knows how our lives, our stories, and our dreams fit into his overall plan to bless others. Have you ever stopped to think that the difficulties you face now could be part of the testimony God wants to use to inspire others? Perhaps the blessings you have not yet seen are not just for you, but so that through you, others can be blessed. Lemuel's story shows us that when God works in our lives, he does so with a greater purpose. He not only blesses us, but uses our lives as a testimony to encourage, strengthen, and edify those around us. Perhaps like Lemuel, all you need to do today is trust and take the next step of faith, even if you don't understand everything. You may not see how the pieces fit together, but God has already charted the way. Your task is not to understand it all, but to trust in the one who understands everything. If he has given you a dream, a promise, a vision, you can be sure that he will carry it out in his perfect time. And while you wait, he is transforming you, strengthening you, and preparing you to receive that blessing you have longed for. Don't underestimate what God is doing at this moment. Don't despise small beginnings or times of waiting, because it is in those moments that God is doing his deepest work in you. Like Lemuel, perhaps what you need today is to open your heart and ask God to show you the next step. You don't need to understand everything immediately. You just need to be willing to trust him. If you are hearing these words, I want you to know that it is not a coincidence. God has been speaking to your life, and this is the moment when he wants you to respond with faith. No matter how long you've been waiting, no matter how confusing or difficult your desert seems, God is with you. He hasn't left you, and his promises are faithful and true. So as you continue to meditate on Lemuel's story and what God is doing in your life, I encourage you not to stop here. There is much more that God wants to show you. As you meditate on Lemuel's story and what God may be doing in your own life, remember that every challenge and every moment of uncertainty is an opportunity for growth and deeper faith. God's plans are often beyond our understanding, but they are always for our good. Trust in His timing and His promises, knowing that He is guiding you every step of the way. Even when the path seems unclear, God is at work, orchestrating every detail for His greater purpose. So take courage, step out in faith, and embrace the journey ahead, confident that God is with you, leading you towards a future filled with hope and blessing. Keep your heart open to His guidance, and you will see how even the most confusing dreams can unfold into a beautiful reality. Remember, you are not alone in this journey, and the best is yet to come.